All right. Are we ready to start? All right. Feel free to enter questions in the chat box or interrupt me if you have questions while we're going here. But I wanted to give an overview of the national board process. When I was originally starting out, thinking about taking all of this process on, I actually had a friend who was in the middle of doing it. And what pushed me into going into the national board process was that he made it sound oh so very simple and easy and laid it out into these very simple to understand parts. So I wanted to do the same for you guys and maybe let you lean a little bit over into that side of it's definitely doable and definitely something you should do. I'm Melanie Watson, by the way, if anybody doesn't know me. I certified in 2019, and I know Ruth has certified and is currently certified, she said, until November of this year. And I know Crystal just recently certified as well. But let me get my screen shared and we will dive right in. All right, so throughout this presentation, I'm just going to take you through some aspects of the certification process, some of the basics of it. I'll walk you through each of the 4 components, talk to you about scoring, and then I'll be here to take questions or just discuss my experience, or maybe Crystal can chime in with her experience of what it was like and how we could manage it and all that. So to start, what are you getting into with certification? We'll talk about the benefits, what is required for your eligibility, the deadlines, and actually this certification year is still active and you can still register, the fees associated with it, how the process works, and what theories they are anchored to. Not to be that person, but one of the major benefits certification is that 12% pay raise. For me, that was a huge part of why I decided to take this process on. Just thinking of pure numbers here, in your first year of eligibility, which would be your 3rd year of teaching, you would make $38,490 for your original salary. With that 12% pay bump, you would make an additional $4,618 or an extra $461 a month if you're on 10 months pay. When I achieved certification, they gave me back pay all the way to August. So they paid out that check in March. And if I were that 3rd year teacher, I would have ended up with a $3,695 check in my hand at the end of that month. So it is a wonderful financial decision for you. And Ruth and I were talking before this, and she mentioned the benefits to your retirement, that when you get that pay raise and you get that salary bump, that all of that money is going towards your retirement. And the earlier you get it, the more money that ends up in your retirement account. An additional benefit for me when I certified, someone from the central office contacted me and said, hey, I noticed you have all your CEUs for this cycle. You got 8 CEUs from your national boards. We'll put that on the next cycle of your license. So not only am I fine to renew my teaching license this year, but I'll have all the credits I need for my next renewal too. And I don't have to worry about taking any of those wonderful classes. In addition to that, I've actually used my national board certification to pick up some side gigs. I've started scoring with EdTPA, and having my national board certification allowed me to not only apply for that, but then actually be able to accept the position. And it's been a nice, easy, fun gig, pays well. And it's, for me, a wonderful benefit to be able to look at other people's teaching and offer advice to it. In order to be eligible for the national board process, you have to have a bachelor's degree, you have to have completed your first 3 years of teaching, and you have to have a valid teaching license. So once you're past that BT area of your teaching license, you can start the national boards process. For the cycle this year, so this is 2021, 2022, the registration window is actually open through the end of February. So if after listening to some of the discussion here, you decide that you want to pursue this, you can still register up until the end of next month. You'll need to know which components you want to take on, and then you'll have to submit them by April 1st to mid-May is the submission window. And you'll actually notice on here that your component 1 testing window is slightly skewed from your submission, your portfolio submission window, which can actually help you set up a nice schedule for yourself, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But once you submit everything this spring, you actually have to wait all the way until December to get your scores, which I think Ruth and Crystal can probably tell you is one of the worst waits ever. But it's great when you see the fireworks, that's for sure. So the fees associated with national boards, I'm sure you've heard people say that it is an expensive process. But when you think about the financial pay bump that you're going to get on your salary, it actually pays itself off almost immediately. For each year that you register, you pay $75. And then for each component you purchase, it's $475. So I did all my components in 1 year, and it only cost me $1,975. So when I got that first back paycheck, I was already paid off. The whole process had turned into a positive financial adventure for me. If you choose to do it across multiple years, you have to pay that $75 registration fee each year that you do it. And if you have to retake components, you'll have to pay for the component again. So I always use that as great motivation to make sure you really put in the work for those components and make sure when you select them and purchase them that your heart's truly in completing the process. In addition, we're very blessed in North Carolina to have a lot of different payment options. I know PENC offers scholarships for national board certifications. We do have a loan available in North Carolina. It's a 3% loan, and they don't charge interest for the entire first year that you pull the loan out. So if you do certify, you can pay the loan back with your back paycheck and never have to pay interest on it. In addition, there are payment plans through national boards. I think they do a 6-month payment plan so that you can cut the fee down a little bit. And instead of taking that big old chunk, you can split it into smaller pieces. My recommendation for starting the process would be to download all of the component information first and start reading through some of what's expected of you. You can access all of these documents without having to pay a dime. So you can research, start thinking, get some ideas for what you want to do. And sorry, I'm admitting somebody, and I can't talk and click at the same time. It's a challenge for me. So you can read through everything that you have to do for the process, start making plans, set a schedule for yourself before you ever pay a registration fee or a component purchase fee. Then once you decide I'm ready to take this process on, you'll go to the National Board website, create an account, select which certificate you're doing, and purchase the components that you want for that year. Once you've completed the process, you could even start writing before you put your registration fee down. I actually did that myself. I had completed component 2 and component 3 before I paid a dime to the national board people. Once I've got all my work together, I'll upload it to the system, wait for what feels like forever, and then they'll give you a score report, and you can decide from there if you need to retake components or do whatever you need to do to finish the process. You have to complete all components within the first 3 years, but you have a total of 5 years to complete your certification process. So you can really take your time with this new system that they have and only bite off little bits and pieces to get your certification. You just have to make sure that you do all components at least once within those first 3 years. Your certification in this new system lasts for 5 years. In the old system, it was a 10-year certification process, but this new process is a little bit cheaper and the maintenance is a little bit simpler and also cheaper. It's called the maintenance of certification when you want to renew your license each year. The total cost of that is only $570, and you can begin the process 1 year before your certificate expires. So I certified in 2019. I'll start this maintenance process next year, which I can't wait to dive into because I don't know a whole lot about this process. But it seems much simpler than the original certification. You only have 2 components and they're kind of connected to each other a little bit better than I think the previous process was. All right, let's dive into the components. So you have 4 components that you complete with your certification, and there's actually 2 different music certifications that you can pick from. One is called the early middle childhood, which is ages 3 to 11, and then you have early adolescent young adult, which is 11 through 18. And the only difference that I can find between these 2 certifications is simply the age group. I actually found out when I was downloading some of the portfolio information that it's the exact same file. And when you click on the PDF, it says EMC/EAYA portfolio. So you can pick and choose which one you did. I did the early adolescent young adult because I teach middle school and high school. I think you could get away with the early middle childhood if you stuck with just 6th grade or if you're at a K-8 school, but it's totally up to you. The process will be the same regardless. So the first component is a wonderful computerized test. How many of you have taken the Praxis, the lovely Praxis? This, I think, is a very, very similar experience from what I understand of the Praxis process. You have 4 sections to the test. First one's just a multiple choice selected response. Then you have 3 constructed responses, which are more like essay questions. The first one's on diagnostic skills, second one's instructional strategies, and the third one is applied theory or composition. I was very happy to find out that it's a path-specific test. So if you're band, you're only answering band questions, which I don't think the Praxis is like that, right? You have to answer all the questions ever. Yeah, this one is a little bit nicer. However, it is still any question about any obscure musical fact from the beginning of time to now in any country. Be ready. I'm kidding, of course. Usually it's fairly common knowledge questions, and we'll go a little more in depth in what you'll see. You do have to schedule your test and go to a testing center to complete the process. And the testing window is from March 1st to January 15th. If you purchase this component, the National Board people will send an email out to you with information on how to register for the test. As soon as you get that email and that slot opens, I dive right in and get your time, because sometimes testing centers can fill up very quickly and you may not get your ideal time. Another thing to think about with these testing issues is I actually took mine during a school day, because with the National Board's process, my district provided me with 3 paid days where I could, free of charge, go work on my portfolio or go take this test. So I took a professional leave day to go take my test, and I didn't have to worry about losing my weekend or having to go into a test right after school. So that may be a good question to ask your districts if you can receive that time as well. So the selected response questions, you can have questions within these 4 categories: theory and history, facilitating music learning, specialized skills and knowledge, and performing and repertoire. And you'll see the approximate percentages of those questions on the test. You have 45 questions on this part of the test and 60 minutes to complete it. Within the portfolio information, the component information for this particular component, they do have about 10 sample questions related to this. I remember the first time I read these, I thought, how in the world am I going to study for this test? These questions are ridiculous. And actually what we ended up doing, me and a friend of mine were taking this test at the same time, and another friend was taking the praxis at the same time. We grabbed as many praxis books as we could and took a weekend vacation and studied all weekend, and then took the test the next Tuesday, so that we were all fresh with all the information that we had studied. But it ended up working in my favor. This first component was my highest score on my national board. So I highly recommend the vacation study group for this component. Oops. On the constructed response, the first one is diagnostic skills. And I think there's similar questions like this on the praxis as well. They'll give you headphones, which may or may not work at all, or even a little. And they'll play a recording for you while you're looking at a score, and you have to diagnose issues that you hear in it. And this one actually has 2 prompts. Beware, 2 prompts for 30 minutes. So don't dawdle like this old gal on this particular constructed response and only have 10 minutes to answer the second one. The first one's a listening example, and you identify the errors. And the second prompt is just looking at a totally different score and identifying potential areas of problems for your students and how to solve those. I can't give any better advice than make sure your headphones work before this particular constructed response comes up, because if they don't work, they cut into your time fixing your headphones. And then it's very hard to answer the question when you can't hear anything. What are you going to do? But I do think that particular constructed response is one of the simpler ones, because it's what you do every day in your classroom, just diagnosing issues from your ears and looking ahead to potential issues for your students in the score. So I honestly don't think many people will find major issues with that particular question. The second constructed response is instructional strategies. And for me, this was one of my favorite responses, because it's so much fun to think creatively about these different learning activities and concepts. How many different ways can I teach one idea in music? How many different kids can I reach with one activity? This one only has 1 prompt, and you get 30 minutes to answer it. They'll give you 2 concepts. You pick one and come up with 6 different ways to teach it. For me, it's just so much fun to think, oh man, how could I teach that? And how exciting would it be to try this? And this is your activity to think in terms of differentiation, how you would reach kids with different learning styles, how you would reach those really tough cases that haven't gotten the concept the first couple times you've taught it. How could you continue to explore that idea? And the final constructed response was my least favorite, applied theory and composition. They'll give you specifications for an 8-measure piece, and you have to write 8 measures worth of music for whatever they ask of you. I don't know about you guys, but I am not a composer. Hated it, but I got through it. The best advice I can give you on these particular questions are know your transpositions. whenever I had to answer this question, I would memorize everybody's B flat scale and just write it out in a chart. They give you a little whiteboard. All right, saxophones, B flat scale, flute, B flat scale, clarinet, B flat scale, so that I could figure out the transposition very quickly for each instrument. But they'll tell you specifically what sort of composition they want. Sorry, my dog needs all my attention right now. Bless her heart, she can't live without me. Come on up if you're gonna be in my video. Oh, she got nervous now. So sorry. They'll give you specifications for your composition, what type of style you want for the music, what instruments will be included with it, and usually they'll give you one key characteristic to it. Like you'll see here, it says it must include syncopation. So you have to make sure that you address that in your writing. For me, that 30-minute time limit on this one was real tough to get through everything. I was lucky that I, again, on my study weekend, had a friend that said, all right, let's sit down and time ourselves and do a practice one. And thank heavens we did, because I realized I needed to move much, much faster with this type of activity. The other, I think, caveat to this one is it is handwritten. They give you a booklet with staff paper in it, and you have to handwrite all of your composition out, which means you can't play it back and hear to make sure that you got your transpositions correct or that it even sounds good. When I completed this one in my testing session, I'm not certain that what I wrote down was going to be at all pleasing to the ear, but I know that it was theoretically correct. My chords worked, and my transpositions were correct. The other advice I'd give, aside from know your transpositions, is keep it simple. There is no need to make this a work of art. 1 chords, 5 chords, that's all you need. Maybe a 4 if you're feeling spunky, okay? But don't get crazy. That is all of component 1. So it's everything that's happening in the testing center. The next component is a portfolio entry. So this component is called differentiation and instruction. In this one, you have a contextual information form, a unit overview, classroom layout, 2 video segments, and a written commentary. And what you're trying to prove in this one is that you are creating instruction that is going to meet the needs of all of your students. That what you're teaching is effective, and it's effective for every student in the room, not just a handful. The way you'll do that is through these 2 video segments and primarily a written commentary. What's key with this particular component is the video segments are about the students performing an activity, not about you teaching it. So with this one, you don't even have to be in the video for it to work for component 2. With any video recordings, pay very special attention to the rules regarding editing and formatting. They are very specific about what constitutes an allowable video and what constitutes a non-allowable video. And I can't think of anything more frustrating than working this hard on something and getting an NS for a score, which is a no score because of some sort of silly rule. When you take your videos for this particular component, you want to use the same class in the same unit of instruction. Think of a pre-test, post-test type of video. One that's during learning and one that reflects what's happened after you've studied the material for a little while. You do need permission forms anytime you're videoing or using student evidence for your portfolio. And you can record the video at any time within 12 months prior to the submission window. So you could start this particular component in August and still submit it in that May deadline. Your written commentary for this section for this component is in 4 sections. You're going to give some context for what you are, who you are teaching and where you're teaching. You're going to discuss how you plan and how you taught the particular unit of study. You're going to discuss the assessment, and you will talk about how that unit worked and how whether you feel like it was an effective unit or not. You only have 12 pages to discuss all of that information, which it sounds like it's a lot, but once you get down to writing, I don't know if it was the same for you, Crystal, but it was like I just had to chop and chop and chop to get inside of that page limit. They are double-spaced pages, and within your component information, they actually give you suggested page lengths for each section. And each section is guided by specific questions that they want you to answer. For example, in this section, some of the questions are: what specific instructional strategies in your plan address the student's needs? How did your planning address various learning styles? And then you'll take those prompts and write it out into your commentary. For me, component 2 was actually one of the easier ones to manage. It was the first component I tried to tackle, and I highly recommend it as you're tiptoeing into the process. It's not quite as massive as some of the other components, and you'll see in the scoring section that it's not weighted quite as heavily. So if you're looking for something to just kind of dip into the process, I would highly recommend component 2 to be a good starting place. The next component, component 3, is also a portfolio entry. This one is focused on your teaching practice and the learning environment you're creating. So as a part of this particular component, you are also submitting 2 videos, but they're going to be 2 very different videos from component 2. These are focused on you and your teaching and how you're setting up your classroom, how you're responding to students, how you're adjusting instruction once you get started. And to complete this portfolio entry, you'll have an introduction form, instructional context form, 2 videos of your teaching, instructional planning form and materials for the unit, and another written commentary. Your videos for this section are much longer, and this is probably much more familiar to those of you that have done EdTPA. To me, this is a very similar process in this component to what you were doing with the EdTPA portfolios. You want 10 to 15-minute clips of lessons that you're teaching. And in this component, you actually want 2 totally different lessons. In fact, when I completed this component, I used totally different classes at 2 totally different times of the years to complete this particular component. You want it to highlight your instruction, and you want it to highlight the full breadth of your instruction. Different teaching strategies, different formats. So actually in the component instructions, it says, do not use the same instructional format. If you do a full group rehearsal for one video, you want small group or one-on-one instruction for the other video. If you're doing a lecture style in one, you want it to be more Socratic in the other one. Using as many different styles as you can to try and prove to the assessors that you're a teacher that uses all of these different ways to activate students' learning. With these videos, you need those permission forms as well. Student release forms is what they're called. I would highly recommend recording yourself often and getting ahead of the recording early. I think I recorded 5 videos before I settled on the 2 I wanted to use. And I think I even started writing a commentary for a different video before I realized I had nothing to talk about in that one, scrapped it, recorded again, and started writing again. So I would give yourself a lot of time on this one to make mistakes and revise. If you don't have a video that's worth talking about, it can be very challenging to answer the questions in the written commentary. This is another situation where you want to be very careful about the editing and formatting rules for videos and what's acceptable and what's not. And this is another one that's a 12-month 12-month timeline. So you can start recording these in August of the year you're submitting. If you're right at the tail end of May, you might be able to get a couple videos too. but you have a long period of time where you kind of explore, work, and find a video that's going to work. Your written commentary for this one, think of it as 2 separate written commentaries. You're going to make one for each video that you record. Each commentary gets to be 4 pages long, double spaced. And this one doesn't have too many questions in it, but they are very deep questions. Component 3 was one of the harder ones for me just because of the specificity that the questions want and why you chose a particular method for teaching and how effective it was for their students. Some of the questions you'll see for this written commentary: how did your instructional decisions you made during the lesson align with your planning? What specific approaches, strategies, techniques, or activities did you use to promote active student engagement in the lesson? And they typically will ask you to cite specific evidence. So typically I would state a fact and throw the timestamp of the video in there to make sure that the assessor could pinpoint exactly what I was talking about. That's the type of concrete evidence they're looking for. With this written commentary, they want that clear process for the planning, teaching, assessing, then going back to planning, teaching, assessing, that circular methodology for your instruction. All right, last one, component 4. This one is for effective and reflective practitioner. This one to me was massive. They are asking for so much information in this component. I had to really think of it as 3 separate things that I then combined at the end for my written commentary. So the 3 major sections to this component are your knowledge of students, generation and use of assessments, and participation in learning communities. And you'll kind of tie all of these 3 pieces to this component together in your commentary. But your knowledge of students is going to be a very detailed profile of one particular class that you teach. For any of you that are in more rural schools, one of my friends was at a very small school at the time she did this, and she had a class of 7 students, which allowed her to go very in depth on those 7 students. And it made this particular component so much easier than if you have a class of 30 where you're having to talk about each individual child within that class of 30. But you will have to provide evidence for how you know your students, and that can be assessment data, email, phone records, MTSS notes. I think I used notes from open house, a progress chart to kind of help set a scene for what these students were like in my particular class. You'll fill out a group profile form that you'll then use to discuss in your written commentary. And then separate from that, you'll have 2 pages of evidence where you pulled all that information. And when you're putting together your evidence pages, you want to make sure that you exclude identifiable information. So let's say you get an email from a parent, you'll want to block out that parent's name when you include it in your evidence. The next section, the generation and use of assessments, you're going to actually take the same class that you made the profile on, and then you're going to discuss 2 assessments that you use for them. You'll have a formative assessment and a summative assessment, and you have to include 3 self-assessments on the formative side. With each one of those assessments, there's a form to fill out for it, a description, or you can take a picture of the assessment if it's not copyright protected. You're going to discuss the data and the results from those. And you have to do that for both the formative and the summative assessment. And the last section of this particular component is participation in learning communities. And for me, this section of the component seems almost like tacked on, like it's very not related to some of the other stuff that you've been doing, but an enjoyable section nonetheless. You want to show that you are continuing to learn and grow as an educator. So you have to identify a professional learning need and a student need. And what's cool about this particular section is that you actually get 24 months prior to the submission deadline to identify the need, but you have to show the impact that your process had on student learning within the last year. So for example, my professional learning need, I actually pulled from my master's thesis that I had done 2 years prior to the national boards process, but I did a presentation within the submission year. So I could use the presentation as the actual impact on student learning. With these particular options, I would highly recommend finding something that you're already doing or something that's already in your list of things to accomplish for your students, like setting up an all-county band, setting up an after-school advanced group, something that's already helping your students be better musicians. Because I know everyone here is always doing stuff like that. There's no need to totally recreate the wheel with some of these options. You can use a lot of the stuff that you're already working on and just discuss it in more detail with this particular component. With the written commentary on this one, it takes all 3 of those sections where you're filling out these different forms and descriptions, and it then asks you the questions about those in those 4 sections, with the reflection being the final one. So some of the questions they'll ask you about your knowledge of students. What and who were the sources for the information that you gathered about your students? What are some of the trends you identified from the information? How did you determine the relative importance of the different kinds of information you gathered? The questions related to the use of assessment. How did you use the knowledge of this class of students that you collected and developed the unit objective to inform the planning of this unit? So how did you take the knowledge of students and then use that to create an assessment that's catered to their needs as students? And very similar EdTPA questions in this one too. How do you know they learned the information? How do you know the results are accurate? What can you do now from that? In the last section, participation in learning communities, some of the questions that they'll ask. How did you identify the area of need? What factors or information did you consider in determining how to meet that need? What impact did addressing the student need have on student learning? And I think that's a key question. Whatever you choose for your community, professional learning need, and for your student need, you have to make sure that you can prove that you've had an impact on the students directly. And then the final one is just reflection, discussing how your assessments worked, how your ability to be a part of a learning community has improved students' learning, how knowing your students impacted creating assessments for them and teaching them. So a few portfolio writing tips. I've read a couple of portfolios, and some of these tips I think are the most commonly missed stuff the first time around. You have to be very careful about how you use your space. They are asking a lot of questions and they want a lot of evidence to support whatever assertion you're making about your teaching. So be careful about how you're using space. I know a lot of people will use abbreviations, like instead of typing students out every time, they'll type students the first time, in parentheses, put SS, and then the rest of the time they just put SS instead of students. Now, I wouldn't get crazy with that, where your entire commentary is written in shorthand, but I do think it can be a very valuable way to save some space. Whenever you're writing, use active voice, not passive voice. So instead of saying the students were handed the papers, I handed the students the papers. Not only does that save you space in most situations, but it also provides the assessors with a lot more concrete and direct evidence for what you are doing for the students and how you are impacting their learning. I think that's one of the hardest things to change, because I think if you've been in the academic world long enough, somehow you start to stray away from active voice. but it is much more effective for writing in this portfolio. I don't think you need to write like a college professor to be successful with this. I think you actually have to write more like a toddler and be very dry and blatant and boring and direct with how you're talking, and actually use fewer words to say more, which I know is not a thing in education. You want to help the assessors find the evidence. They are trained to spot things in your writing, but I think anything that you can do to help them see that is going to be beneficial for you. In your component information, they'll have the questions that you're reflecting on, and I would answer those questions in order. When I started writing my components, I actually copied and pasted them into my document and just answered them right underneath the question and then deleted them later. I think this helps the assessor see the direct line through your commentary, and they can check the boxes a lot easier. I tried to always start a new section with a new question that I'm answering, and then use the question inside of the first sentence to make sure that they could very clearly see that this is where I'm answering that new question. Another thing that I think people have a really hard time doing is using all three types of writing that they're asking for. There's actually a general portfolio information packet from National Board that goes into depth and gives examples of three types of writing that they're looking for: describing, analyzing, and reflecting. And I think a lot of people that fall short of certifying with national boards miss one of these three writing styles. Either they're spending too much time describing the lesson and not spending enough time talking about why they chose that particular lesson, why they chose that teaching method, or how it affected their kids. You have to kind of seamlessly work between all three of those. Tell me about the lesson, tell me why you picked that lesson, and tell me whether it was effective or not. Then tell me how you'd change it. But if you spend too much time in any one of those categories, you're going to end up missing important pieces of information that your assessor wants. Couple of tips or tricks that I learned from the School of Hard Knocks and National Board certification. Gather your student release forms early, because one of them will get homeschooled right before you're turning everything in, and now you can't find them ever again. Not that that happened to me or anything. But you want to pass all these forms out early, gather them, keep up with them, and be very cautious about students entering your class mid-year, students leaving your class if you never got the form. These are very important, and you can be audited for them. I've not gone through the auditing process, but I imagine it's as fun as a tax audit. So yay, forms. Be very careful about procrastination. I don't think my house has ever been cleaner than when I was doing my national boards. Bookshelves were organized. My dishes were stacked perfectly, because anything was easier than sitting down and writing about these stinking components. So I had to set a schedule for myself. Saturday mornings were my writing time, and every Saturday morning I'd sit down and write. But in addition to that, I was trying to accomplish certification in 1 year. So I set my schedule up to match with the quarters. I did component 2 in the first quarter. I did component 3 in the second quarter. And then I took 2 quarters to do component 4 and revise everything before submission. And then component 1, I waited to do until after everything was submitted. Since the submission window ended about mid-May, I had several weeks where I could take the test and not have to worry about any of the portfolio. But by setting up those little times for myself, I could at least make sure I was accomplishing things in a timely fashion. But even with that schedule, I went back and pretty much totally rewrote my second component. By the time I'd gone through component 3, I realized that I was really missing the point on a lot of component 2, and totally went back and almost rewrote the thing from scratch. But because I had started so early, I had plenty of time to do that. I think the best way to combat procrastination is to sit down and just start typing. Even if it's just a stream of consciousness, get your fingers moving and things will start happening. You can delete the stuff that doesn't work, but you can't delete something that's not there. So put information on the page to get yourself going. I think one of the most frustrating parts of the national board process is how scattered important information is. They have 9,000 documents in 4 different places, and the thing you need, I read it somewhere, which document is it in? So make sure that you've got all that information saved somewhere and you can go back and reference. I know a lot of people will have these giant binders with everything printed off and highlights and all the tabs and stuff. I kept everything digital myself, but I would have 3 or 4 windows up on my screen so I could go back and forth between different pieces of information. Be very careful about the rules and specifications for National Board. They have rules about rosters, they have rules about videos, they have rules about the age limits for your kids. So make sure that you read everything first and keep up with all of that different stuff, because like I said, a no score at the end of this whole process is like, I can't imagine anything that'd be more frustrating than that. I highly recommend finding people around you that are doing the same process. Facebook has some awesome groups. One of them is called National Board Certified Teacher, and there's 2 administrators in that Facebook group. One of them has written books about all the components, named Bobby Faulkner, and another one's named, her name on Facebook is Eliz, capital A, Beth, and both of these stick around on that Facebook group and answer questions for people, and they're both like amazing rock star people. And I actually never asked a question on any of these Facebook groups, but I just kind of sat back and watched everyone else ask stupid questions. And then all my questions were answered, and I never even had to make my name known. Whatever question you have, someone else has it, and you can find the answer on there. They also have maintenance of certification groups to help you get that process started too. And this December's score release was the first release for maintenance of certification people. So there is at least one group before us that has gone through that process if you're looking to be starting that process soon. Highly recommend finding readers for your portfolio, but don't find more than 3 because they'll start to give you conflicting advice. I also made a point to find somebody that wasn't in my content area that would read through everything just to make sure that what I was saying made sense and I wasn't making any assumptions about who was reading it. To me, that was a very valuable tool. With component 1, study group's the way to go, man. Grab you an Airbnb, have some fun, study some, talk about modes. It's great. Start gathering all your evidence early. If you know you're going to go through this process, when you're doing open house, parent conferences, start of the year stuff, go ahead and start keeping all of that documentation readily available to help you plan out some of these components. Even if you're thinking about starting this now, you can start that collection process before you even register or commit to paying for any components. One of the things I found particularly interesting are that challenging classes, the ones that make you want to throw chairs against walls, are the best ones for National Board because they give you so much to talk about. Any student that's giving you a hard time is going to be a great case study for this process because they're challenging you to be a better teacher and they're challenging you to think about different ways to grab them. So keep those challenging classes for this process. When you are submitting, double check all of your submission links. Make sure your videos work, make sure your PDFs are formatted correctly, and everything is easily accessible, because if anything is not submitted correctly, they just toss a no score your way and take all your money. All right, scoring. So the way National Board is scored is you actually have 3 requirements you have to satisfy before you certify. Your assessment center section has to have an average score of 1.75 between all 4 of those components, your selected response and your 3 constructed responses. You then have to have at least an average score of 1.75 on your portfolio section. And then you have to have a weighted score of 110. I think of all of the scoring requirements, that last one that you have to reach 110 is the one that prevents people from certifying most often. When you hear people say I was a point short, that's usually what they're talking about. So each component is weighted slightly different. Component 1 is your most massive chunk. It's 40% of your score. The selected response is 20%, and then all 3 constructed responses are the other 20% of that. For your component 2 is 15%, component 3 is 30%, and component 4 is 15%. So like I said earlier, that component 2, I think, is a really great way to kind of dip into the process, because it's not heavily weighted on your score and it's not quite as massive as component 4. Food for thought while you are planning out how to approach this process. This is what your score report will look like. You'll notice that the assessment center section is all together with your selected response and your 3 constructed responses scores, and then it's all averaged at the bottom. That average is the key part for what you're looking for. But also remember, with retakes, component 1, you can actually retake different sections of it. So I don't have to retake the whole test if I don't want to. I can retake just the selected response items. Then your portfolio section is separate, and you'll have your scores for each component within it. You'll notice the feedback statements are particularly lackluster and very unhelpful. I think that's been a frustration that's voiced quite often. These are canned statements that are thrown onto your portfolio, and for many, they can be a little bit challenging to decipher. But I think if you take what's written in that feedback statement and go directly back to either the core propositions for National Board, or if you will go back to your component information and pinpoint which question is most likely to answer that, you can kind of find what they're looking for and what you were missing. Here are all of the helpful documents I could find. The first one's your National Board website, where you'll register, find all your component information, FAQs, all that stuff. The next one is the guide to National Board certification, which is a PDF of the process, requirements, eligibility, fees, deadlines. The next one's your general portfolio instructions, which are writing tips, rules for each component, rules for rosters, formatting rules. The next one is the candidate resources page, which has all of these different documents all listed on the website. National Board has their own music standards that each component references. So reading through those kind of gives you an idea of the underlying theory behind what they're trying to get you to do. There's a scoring guide, separate PDF that just talks about how to read your score and how everything's weighted. And then a scoring calculator, which you can use to determine highest or lowest possible scores to pass or to certify rather, and how everything is weighted. I know that was a ton of information, so I'm here to answer questions, and I do wish you the best on your journey. So feel free to unmute or type in the chat box, and I'm here, Crystal's here, to answer any questions you may have.
Hello.
Hello.
So you say that I am National Board certified and I've renewed once for 10 years. So they're allowing us to do the maintenance of certification starting 2 years before our expiration. Are you saying that if it's only for 5 years, you only get 1 year?
No.
So you also
one
get the
full
2 years.
year. Yeah. So
Okay.
you can start the process. Yes, what you're saying is correct. You can start the process 2 full years. So it's like you get a free pass. Let's say you miss a component, you can then take the next year. But you'll actually receive your scores, I think, after the expiration date on your certification, if you wait until that very last year. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Yeah, because I did it the year before necessary when I did my 10-year renewal. And that just worked.
Gotcha.
The thing you're saying about the composition,
Yes.
I actually wrote a composition in advance.
Ooh.
I had the chord progression that I wanted. It was something that I felt like I could adapt, and they ended up asking for like a brass quintet or something and a particular style, like a fanfare, and they wanted this particular rhythm. So I already had the chord structure in place that I wanted and a little bit of a melody, and I just adapted it. And I think at the very end, I started freaking out because I was trying to transpose the French horn part against the trumpet part. And I was like, wait, that's wrong. I know the key signature is right. What's wrong with me? But yeah, that helped. And then you could concentrate on the little details that they wanted. But I don't think that's cheating because I wrote it. But yeah, I was able to adapt it to the time signature. They wanted a particular time signature and style and instruments and all of that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think I'm onto them. I think there's a trick, and they always use a brass quintet because you have to transpose for horn.
Cool.
Because I also had a brass quintet.
As did I, but I would. But I would just, if you do prepare one, double check whatever time signature that they ask, because I had practiced it so much. Like I can write it down right now because I had my chord progression and I had like a main melody. Like I was there. I was like, if they ask for syncopation, I'm gonna change this. Got it. So I'm working and it's like 25 minutes in, and I'll look up and I'm like 3/4. So I had done the whole thing in 4. So I'm like frantically erasing just one beat, and I was like, man, that half note becomes a dotted half note. So, and I didn't even finish the horn part. So I had written out all of it. And I had to, dotted quarter or dotted half notes.
My bad.
Right. But luckily whole notes are easily changed.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I didn't even finish, and I passed, and I did like so much better than I ever thought. So it does not have to be perfect. It does not have to be beautiful, because I was freaking out about the composition. Like I can whatever, do anything, but ask me to compose without being able to hear it, not my strength. But if you do prepare one, just double check the time, learn from me. That was a frantic 5 minutes.
That whole test, worst test I've ever taken.
I felt so drained, like, and it's so like randomly specific. Like you can figure them out, a lot of them, but it's pretty in depth. One thing, and I wrote down, I've got pretty much everything you said. I tried to type up in the minutes. So the minutes for this meeting are going to be like 5 pages long, but very thorough.
I can send you my notes if you'd like.
Yes, that would be wonderful. I've got a spot for your presentation. But the one thing is, as soon as it's time for your test to go into the next session, your time starts. So I was taking my time, I was reading the directions, but like the 30 minutes had already begun. So even as you read your directions and you make sure of things, you're already using your time. So just be aware of that. Maybe know the directions ahead of time. And like, I felt like I did, but I didn't think my time would start until I went to the next page, but it does.
Has anybody done maintenance of certification? Okay.
I've not yet, but I'm starting it next year.
Yeah, I've signed up for it and paid for it and all that jazz. So, and I've got my forms collected and all of that, and I've made a little bit of a video, but we will see. It's very different. It's three sections in one 10-minute video. I think you could it's a 10-minute video, and it can have up to 3 different videos in it. And writing about 2 two things that you've learned, and the video pertains to one of those two things. I think that's the way it was described. I haven't really jumped in there, and I need to. So
Yeah, I think I just decided like 2 days ago that I'm going to do it my MOC this year. Sorry, my dog is squeaking as toy. But I assessed renewals the last year that they were on the 10-year cycle. So I assessed those a couple of summers ago, and then now I'm doing my MOC this year. So I feel slightly prepared, but also I just decided 2 days ago I was going to do it. So I'm probably not prepared at all.
And you guys will have to come back and tell us how to do the MOC. Give us some shortcuts.
absolutely.
Are there any other questions or discussion or comments or anything like that? I know we've been in here for an hour, and I'm sure you're ready for, I'm ready for bed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 8 o'clock is my new bedtime. I really appreciate everybody coming to listen to this. I hope it wasn't too much of a drag on your Monday evening, but do know that there are a lot of people in here, and it definitely sounds like we've got plenty of mentors in here. If anybody's looking to get their certification for the first time, there's people to help you, and there's people that are willing to. And I don't know if you saw Ruth's comment up there, but she was a reader for CMS for a long time and said she would love to help somebody. So if you're starting that process, or if you're doing MOC, she'd be a great resource for anybody that's looking for that. If there's nothing else for the good of the cause, have a great evening. Thank you so much for your time. Oh, yes, I meant to do that. I'm so sorry. Yes.
And
if anybody,
I'll put it in the notes too. I'll put it in the minutes as well for people that maybe couldn't have made it. And you did wonderful. Great job.
Oh, thank you. I hate doing presentations, but you know,
it was great. You did wonderful. You have a very good voice.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. And Crystal, I'll share my written notes with you as well if you could use them.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll add it in.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I'll include this link on the notes as well, so I'm sure they'll come out in Crystal's minutes. Everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.